Morning television has always thrived on warmth, routine, and the comfort of familiar faces. So when an ordinary broadcast suddenly turns deeply personal, it catches everyone off guard. That's exactly what happened during a recent live hour of Today, when Jenna Hager paused the usual light chatter and leaned into something far more vulnerable. The studio lights were bright, the mugs were steaming, and the audience expected laughter. Instead, they got honesty. It wasn't dramatic in a theatrical way. It was human. Jenna spoke not as a host or a public figure, but as a friend. And at the center of her words was Savannah Guthrie, her longtime colleague and confidant. What unfolded wasn't scandal or spectacle. It was a reflection on friendship, pressure, and the quiet weight both women have carried behind their polished smiles. Who Jenna Hager is at 44. At 44, Jenna Hager stands at an interesting crossroads, seasoned yet evolving, confident yet candid about her insecurities. Born on November 25, 1981, in Dallas, she grew up in a family the world watched closely. As the daughter of George W. Bush and Laura Bush, her early adulthood unfolded under intense scrutiny. But fame did not define her entirely. Jenna built her path through teaching, writing, and eventually television. She brought humor and approachability to the fourth hour of Today, creating a space that felt less like a broadcast and more like a kitchen table conversation. Motherhood, marriage, and career ambition all coexist in her life. At this stage, she appears more comfortable acknowledging both her privilege and her personal struggles. That authenticity has become her strongest currency. Savannah Guthrie's steady presence. Opposite. Jenna's effervescence is the calm, thoughtful presence of Savannah Guthrie. Born December 27, 1971, in Melbourne, Australia, and raised in Tucson, Arizona, Savannah's path to journalism was deliberate and disciplined. With a law degree and years of reporting experience, she carries a seriousness that anchors the show. When she joined Today and eventually became co-anchor, she navigated high-profile transitions with composure. Viewers often see her as steady, measured in tone, careful with words, grounded in faith and family. Behind that steadiness, though, is a person who has spoken openly about fertility struggles, career pressures, and the emotional toll of being a public figure. Savannah's strength lies not in perfection but in resilience. Her ability to remain centered during turbulent news cycles has made her a trusted voice for millions. The friendship behind the cameras. Television chemistry can be manufactured, but genuine friendship cannot. Jenna and Savannah's bond developed gradually after Jenna joined the show as a contributor. What began as mentorship evolved into mutual reliance. They celebrated milestones together, weddings, babies, career highs, and quietly supported each other through disappointments. Viewers sensed it in their laughter and unscripted exchanges. Off camera, they shared the kinds of conversations that only colleagues who become friends truly understand. Doubts about performance, fear of public missteps, exhaustion from balancing work and home. In a competitive industry, such trust is rare. That is why Jenna's recent on-air vulnerability carried weight. It wasn't gossip. It was testimony. She described Savannah not simply as a co-anchor, but as someone who steadied her during moments of deep insecurity. The emotion felt less like revelation and more like gratitude long overdue. Growing up in the spotlight. Jenna's reflections also touched on the long shadow of public expectation. Being a presidential daughter meant adolescence under magnified lenses. Mistakes became headlines. Lessons were learned publicly. Over time, she has spoken about how that pressure shaped her, sometimes humbling her, sometimes strengthening her. Teaching through programs like Teach for America and later working internationally broadened her perspective beyond political identity. By the time she returned to media, she had gathered stories and empathy that softened her edges. Her openness about anxiety and self-doubt resonates with viewers who see beyond the famous last name. At 44, she appears less concerned with proving herself and more focused on meaningful connection. That maturity was evident in her words about Savannah. Less defensive, more reflective, grounded in shared humanity rather than status. Savannah's quiet battles. While Jenna's past played out publicly, Savannah's struggles were more internal. She has spoken candidly about fertility treatments and miscarriages, topics once considered too private for morning television. By addressing them, she offered comfort to women navigating similar heartbreaks. Her marriage to political consultant Michael Feldman and her role as a mother exist alongside the demanding pace of live broadcasting. Savannah has also weathered newsroom upheavals and national controversies with grace. Through it all, she has maintained a tone of dignity that viewers respect. Yet dignity does not mean invulnerability. Jenna's remarks hinted at moments when Savannah carried more than she revealed, times when strength masked fatigue. That acknowledgement felt less like exposure and more like a friend gently reminding the world that even the steadiest among us need support. When honesty meets timing. Public confession always invites speculation. Some wondered whether Jenna's remarks were strategic or spontaneous. But what mattered more was the tone. It lacked sharpness or blame. Instead, it sounded like someone processing the complexity of long-term friendship. Relationships evolve. Ambition can create subtle tensions. Misunderstandings happen even between loyal allies. Jenna did not accuse, she reflected. She described a moment years earlier when both women recognized their shared vulnerabilities. They promised transparency, knowing that silence can quietly build distance. In the glare of studio lights, that promise resurfaced. Rather than igniting drama, the conversation encouraged viewers to examine their own friendships. How often do we assume strength in others and overlook their silent struggles? The segment became less about television personalities and more about accountability between friends. The power of female solidarity. Morning television is often underestimated, but its influence is vast. Millions begin their day with these hosts, absorbing not just headlines, but emotional cues. When two prominent women speak openly about doubt, competition, and reconciliation, it normalizes those experiences. Female friendships, particularly in professional settings, are frequently portrayed as fragile or rivalrous. Jenna's narrative pushed against that stereotype. She emphasized admiration alongside honesty. Savannah's presence in her life, she suggested, sharpened her rather than threatened her. That message resonated because it countered the tired trope of women competing for limited space. Instead, it illustrated partnership, imperfect yet enduring. Viewers responded not with outrage but with empathy. Social media buzzed with reflections on sisterhood and growth rather than scandal. In that way, what could have been sensational instead became instructive. Reinvention in midlife. There is something powerful about public figures embracing reinvention in their 40s and 50s. Jenna, at 44, is navigating a new chapter, children growing older, career expanding, personal confidence deepening. Savannah, in her mid-50s, continues to evolve as a journalist and author. Both women embody the idea that identity is not fixed. Growth requires reassessment and sometimes uncomfortable truth-telling. Jenna's candid moment may signal her own shift toward more substantive storytelling. Savannah's quiet resilience reminds audiences that steadiness can coexist with change. Their dynamic reflects a broader cultural shift. Women claiming space for vulnerability without sacrificing authority. That balance feels particularly relevant in an era hungry for authenticity. A conversation that felt human. Ultimately, what made the broadcast memorable was its humanity. There were no shocking revelations, no dramatic exits, no conspiracies. There were two women acknowledging the weight of shared history. In a media environment often driven by outrage, this quieter form of honesty stood out. It reminded viewers that behind every polished segment are individuals navigating personal realities. Friendship is rarely flawless. It is layered with admiration, misunderstanding, forgiveness, and growth. Jenna's voice, slightly trembling yet steady enough to continue, carried that truth. Savannah's steady presence, whether speaking or listening, completed the picture. Together, they modeled something simple yet profound. Courage does not always roar. Sometimes it sounds like a friend saying, "You mattered to me more than I ever said." And that is a story worth hearing.